G'day everyone. Uh, Nice to see you all. My name's Justin. I'm the Sustainability Officer here at Macedon Ranges Shire Council, and wanted to jump on to firstly welcome you all to the second of our three home sustainability webinars. Tonight's webinar is all around electric vehicles and getting our homes ready for electric vehicles. Before I go any further, I'd like to acknowledge that the Macedon Ranges stretches across three traditional owner groups, the Dja Dja Wurrung, the Taungurung, and the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung. I pay my deepest respects to elders past and present and thank them for their continuous care and connection to the land and waterways of the Macedon Ranges. I'd like to introduce our expert for the evening, Bryce Gatton, who is a bit of a rock star in the EV world, to be honest. I've seen his name pop up many a time, so I'm quite excited to hear his presentation. Bryce has been working and writing and presenting in the EV sector since 2008. He writes for Australia's premier EV news site, thedriven.io. Runs the EV transition support consultancy, EV Choice, and provides EV build safety training to university race teams as well. He doesn't stop there. In his spare time, Bryce also writes EV topics for Renew magazine and regularly presents on EV issues and opportunity. He is the writer behind the Australian Electric Vehicle Association website and its car model fact sheets. I will hand over to Bryce for our presentation this evening. Like I said, if you've got any questions, throw them into the Q&A and we'll go over them at the end. But thanks, Bryce.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Justin, and I hope I'll live up to it for the presentation and get all people's information needs across. As I said, this is the Renew webinar for the Macedon Ranges, and by the way, I'll also be putting my email address at the end. If you want a copy of the slides, just email me. As I said, it'll be EVnews at Big Pond. I'll put that email address back up at the end. They're the topics I'm hoping to cover tonight in the depth that you wish, but feel free to ask the questions if I haven't quite covered something properly for you. First up, I always throw in a slide on what is an EV, because there are actually four sorts. The first pair are the plug-in electric vehicles, the PEVs. The simplest of which is the battery electric vehicle, the BEV. They basically have a reasonable sized battery, an electric motor driven by that battery, and as you slow down, the motor turns into a generator and uses what's called regenerative braking to put energy back into the battery. And that basically will run you around most of the time. In a BEV, it will run you around all the time. For a plug-in hybrid, that runs you around for a shorter period because they were designed in the days when battery electric vehicles the battery part was very expensive, so they kept the internal combustion engine, the ICE bit labelled there, going and put in a much smaller battery to keep the costs down. Again, they have an electric motor driven from the battery, and then as you slow down, you regenerate electricity using that sort of energy to put back in the battery, and that slows your car down. So you use the brakes a lot less. And this happens in all electric cars, right down to the hybrids and things I'll mention in a moment. Both of those, by the way, will be allowed to still be sold after the bans in Europe and several other countries on the sale of new internal combustion engines. The next one, however, the hybrid electric vehicle, a lot of people know these by the Camrys or the early Prius. They're the first ones around. These ones won't make it across the line when the bans come in because basically when they run out of petrol, they stop. Whereas the first two, you could at least plug, even if the plug-in hybrid ran out of petrol, you could keep charging it by a battery and keep it going. Well, most of them, some of them get a bit cranky about it. But the hybrid electric vehicle is basically an energy saving device when it comes to the battery and electric motor. So they have a very small battery in them, and they use basically the momentum of you slowing down to charge that battery. And that's how they work. Some of them got down to, they have a very small battery. They don't run on electric only, which is why they won't be made allowed to be sold after those ban dates come in, which I'll mention later. And the last one, of course, is the fuel cell electric car, alternatively named the hydrogen car. They're still an electric car, but they use a hydrogen fuel cell to convert a whole in a chemical reaction to basically create electricity to run the car. They still need a battery because you can't regenerate hydrogen. And you also need the battery to provide a oomph, acceleration, because the hydrogen fuel cell is a bit like a diesel motor. It doesn't like accelerating or decelerating quickly. So the battery provides that backup. The technology in that is not really all that mature. We have about 4 or 5 refueling stations in Australia. So you may be guessing by now that the fuel cell electric car, and certainly in car form, is probably already dead, is probably best called a zombie walking. It might gain some legs in the trucking industry, although several of the big truck manufacturers have already given up on fuel cell. They just say they're just too expensive to run compared to just a battery electric vehicle. I like to throw this slide in because it's a reminder that battery electric vehicles are not a flash in the pan. They're not certainly a new thing. They've been around right from the very start. In fact, back in the turn of last century, around the 1900s, about a third of all cars were petrol driven, a third of all cars were external combustion or steam driven, and the last third, in fact, slightly more than a third, were electric. And the problem with them then was that electricity was confined to the biggest central business districts in the biggest cities in the world. So if you ventured far from there, you couldn't carry a can of electricity. So it was very hard to get a recharge outside of those areas. So the petrol car won because you could basically dump a 44-gallon drum or carry 2-gallon drums of petrol with you anywhere. So yeah, that was the time of the petrol car. The technology wasn't quite mature enough either. In fact, very immature in some ways because they ran on lead-acid batteries, which didn't last all that long either. But yeah, they were a competing technology and had a go at it. Mind you, they didn't disappear. Through the 50s, the East Berlin Postal Service ran on electric vans. In the 60s, there were a number of conversion vehicle companies in America doing changes. In the 70s, well, there's still a couple of them sitting on the moon. So yeah, electric vehicles are bubbling away in the background until they got the technology right with the batteries and the motor controllers and what have you. So I always talk about cars and call it the EV transition in cars, but it comes in all forms. Anything that moves that runs on fossil fuels will eventually have to get off the fossil fuel treadmill. And this includes trucks. Now those two there, the Tesla truck is now rolling out in America. The truck below that is actually a conversion truck that they do here in Victoria, SEA trucks. Mining machinery is in fact going electric, and a number of the Sandvik, Volvo, and others are actually starting to build electric mining machinery. Obviously makes a lot better sense when you have no fumes underground. The electric Bobcat was shown start of 2022 for possible release as a model, I think maybe this year or next. That tractor, by the way, will be released, I think next year or next. They're saying that it will come about in Australia even. Bicycles, as I keep saying, who hasn't tried to be run over by an electric delivery bicycle? They are everywhere, and pretty much every delivery bicycle is electric, and every second bicycle you see on the road just privately ridden is now electric. Motorbikes, yes, they are a thing. That is an electric live wire, otherwise built by Harley Davidson. So yes, they have even entered the electric market, and I see one of those occasionally at the Swinburne Charger in Melbourne. Planes, yes, they are also a thing, and those two, the one in the middle there, against the blue sky, is a flight trainer, and has a small fleet of them actually here in Australia as well. It's a Pipistrel Alpha, if you want to look them up, and they have a number of different sized planes. The one next to it is called the Alice, and is actually in flight trials for registration to sell because it's a whole new aircraft, and that was a 9-seater and 2-pilot. There are actually flying cars being built. Now that one's called the Black Fly, and it's a single seater at the moment, needs to be piloted, but long term they envisage that to be an autonomous car or an autonomous taxi like the Jetsons, if people remember back to the 60s in that cartoon. It would just land next to you, and it's vertical takeoff and landing, and you hop in and it'll take you to your destination. It has about 100 kilometres range. It does about 100 kilometres an hour in speed. Autonomous cars, that's built in Victoria, in Croydon, out east of Melbourne. And that one is actually on trials overseas at the moment. It's meant to be a last mile vehicle where you pull up at a train station or whatever, and you hop into, you've called it up, it comes and collects you, and off you go. So ultimately that will be an autonomous vehicle that currently has pedals and a steering wheel whilst it's in its trial stage. Buses, I use the example of a big Chinese city that changed all of their bus fleet over to electric, all 10,000 of them, and it didn't bring down their grid, much as some people would have you believe otherwise. And we've even seen a few around Melbourne now. I've been following a few lately in my car, my electric car, behind them and saying all electric bus. Yes, ferries are a thing too. That one does a trade around some of the Scandinavian countries. Has about a 4 megawatt hour battery in a very large battery, and is doing very well. And there are a number of orders, and they're going on, more of them going on water as they speak. And electric garden machinery, the councils love those particular ones because they will run all day on a charge, and then will charge off an ordinary power point overnight to be ready to go the next day. We have seen transitions before. This is not a new thing. This is the last transport transition that happened at the turn of last century. As I said, there was those 3 different types of cars. Before that, obviously, was the horse and carriage. Obviously, there's an affluent area, so it was going to do the transition sooner. But as you can see there, April 1900, 1 horseless carriage amongst all the horses and carriages. And 13 years later, you'll see the swishing tail of 1 horse pulling a carriage, and everything else is a petrol vehicle. Well, probably a number of electric and steam driven in there as well, but pretty much all courseless carriages, shall we say. And it's typical of all transitions. It starts off slowly as a technology starts being realised as something that is worth picking up, and then it takes off exponentially, and then pretty much it just soaks up the last of the people at the end. And we've had this from anything from the flushing toilet to the refrigerator, colour TV, smartphones that we've had more recently. Every new technology that comes about follows the same curve. If you're feeling bored, by the way, our world in data.org is a rather fun place to generate these sorts of curves. So a cold, wet, windy winter's day is probably a good time to have a play there. And this is Australia. By 2023, the end of then, we're looking, this is the middle of 2023, we're looking at somewhere around 8% sales. We actually hit about 7.6, somewhere around there. And basically doubling every year for the last few years. So we're hitting that exponential takeoff. The rest of the world, 12%, it's actually more than that now overall, and in Europe it's 1 in 4, 24, 25%. In Norway, where the ban's coming as first in 2025, they're 93% plug-in electric vehicles, 86% of those being the full battery electrics and only 6 plug-in hybrids. Now, another question I often get is, what is an EVSE? Well, it's basically a car charger, and there's 3 sorts. There's the sort you plug in, and the one at your top, get it right, top left, is the one that generally comes with the car and plugs into a power point. The one below is the one that I use when I go off the beaten DC track, say Melbourne to Perth or something like that, or sort of into regions where the DC chargers haven't quite rolled out yet. As I'll show a map a bit later, they're getting around pretty fast now. So you can plug into anything up to a 32 amp 3-phase outlet, the one below, but the 10 amp one at the, or the 3-pin plug one at the top is a perfectly useful one. Most manufacturers still supply them with the car, although some manufacturers are starting to leave you to buy it yourself, and they're about $400 up. The middle ones there are the ones that you'll put on at home on the wall, and they give you a faster charge than a 3-pin plug one. And I'll talk about the speeds a bit later. I always recommend the one or type of one in the middle with a tethered lead for home use, and for council or public use, the one that is a socket and you bring your own lead. They're like, what do you call those things? The things that you inflate your tyres with at petrol stations, the tyre hoses, the compressor lines. People drive over them, treat them really badly. So councils and public chargers have decided we won't bother providing a lead. We'll leave a socket and you bring your own lead. A normal BYO lead is about $200, and a number of manufacturers actually throw them in the car as well. The third one is the DC fast charger. Anything from around 50 kilowatt charging, I'll explain a bit more about the numbers in a minute, up to, that's the orange one there, to 350 kilowatt charging for that green and white one on your far right. If you think about it, that plug-in one with a 3-pin plug, maybe 2 kilowatts it'll charge. The green and white one can charge up to 350, so 350 divided by 2 is 175 times faster. So charging speeds can vary very much depending on what you are plugging into. And I'm trying to remember which slide I have next. Oh yes, I talk about the plug wall. A lot of people ask me about the fact that, are the plugs settled yet? And I have to say yes. In Australia, 2017-18, the middle pair there, the top is where you plug in your AC side, so there's a charger built into the car that converts AC to DC to put DC into your battery. And the bottom, the 2 big extra pins on the bottom of the CCS2 plug, is where it actually can get the DC charger plug straight in direct and provide a much higher current direct to the battery. And that there is our Australian standard. So all new cars brought to Australia use that plug, except for 2 old models that when they're superseded will go to that. And those 2 are the Nissan Leaf that's brought to Australia, and the Lexus 300e, which the new Lexus already has that, and the Nissan Ariya when it arrives, if it arrives, if it's running a bit late, will also have that CCS2 system. In Japan, that's the system they use there with the Type 1 plug and the CHAdeMO DC plug. For reasons I'll explain in a minute, that they like that CHAdeMO plug, and for reasons of having a very different electric supply system, they can't use the 3-phase, the more pin plug, the Type 2 that we and most of the world uses. So they stuck to that. And America was also using that as a CCS1 system. So you had this, the Type 2 plug system and the CCS2, but swap with the CCS1. I should probably put a picture of that one in, but anyway, America was using that. I took the pictures out because they have recently swapped to the Tesla plug, which is that one. Again, North America has a peculiar electricity system where it's only 120 or 240 volts, so they don't need the multiple pins that we use. We get a better system for charging. So they've actually all jumped on board with the Tesla plug. So there are your 3 systems, excluding China, and we've just ignored China and its slightly bizarre plug. But it just puts whatever plug it sends to the world. So most cars it sends overseas come with our CCS2 system. Moving right along, yes, people keep asking me about vehicle to grid or vehicle to home or vehicle to load. That's generally referred to as V2X, vehicle to something, getting power out of the battery as well as just charging the battery to begin with. V2L is vehicle to load. As you'll see, I'll just go back, that round CHAdeMO plug was designed for the vehicle to load system from day one in 2012. The CCS system wasn't, but it's now being developed for it, and that is a CCS plug plugged into the AC side. So whilst your CHAdeMO vehicle to load, so getting basically plugging an extension lead into the car, will cost you about $10,000 for the box. The CCS system, so the system that we now have for all our cars here, is a couple of $100 for the adapter, and a lot of the manufacturers that sell V2L cars actually include the adapter. So as I said, for CHAdeMO, it's DC. For the CCS cars, it's AC. For vehicle to home, vehicle to building, so it's basically providing power to your switchboard to drive the whole house. And vehicle to grid, they're very similar things, but one provides power to the switchboard behind the meter and disconnects from the grid when you're using it. And for the other one, it provides power to the grid as well and can be told to export like a Powerbit, Tesla Powerwall, all those types of things. And those 2 are currently being done by the DC plug. However, as I said, the CHAdeMO does V2X, but it lost the plug more. CCS is being developed to do V2X, and many cars come with V2L, vehicle to load, and some cars are starting to arrive with the V2HG function. The platform used by Hyundai, Kia, Genesis, is basically covering the Ioniq 5, Ioniq 6, Kia EV6, EV9, and the Genesis GV60 from memory. They have the capacity to it, but they haven't enabled it for the cars coming to Australia. So they will start arriving, and the systems to be able to do the V2H, vehicle to home, will start to arrive late this year. As soon as the battery standard for Australian standard for batteries is updated to include cars, you'll be able to actually buy the boxes because it'll be deemed compliant. If they've done the compliance incorrectly, say in Europe, you'll be able to bring the boxes in and start connecting them from late this year. Vehicle to grid, on the other hand, requires the grid to talk to it, and the grid hasn't quite learned its language yet, shall we say. So it might be next year before the grid can start talking and start exporting power through your vehicle to home system. Refueling is an interesting point because we're used to that. We're used to going out of our way, stop during our trip and refuel the car. What happens now is our destination becomes our refueling point, and you don't have to take the time out to stand by the car refueling it. Basically, your home is your majority point of charging, but you can stop at a library or at the shops. If you're on the highway to Sydney, and DC charger, so that's the only time you're doing a within trip. So I think workplace charging will become a thing, as I'll talk about a bit later. So your destination becomes a charger. So the time for charging is, to some degree, irrelevant because you're doing your thing while the car's doing it. I always say charging at home takes me 10 plus 10 seconds, 20 seconds, because it's 10 minutes to plug it in at night and 20 seconds, 10 seconds to unplug it in the morning. So the time it takes to charge is irrelevant for most of the thing if it's your destination that is your charging point. And that's the big mental shift we have to make. It's not now a mobile phone model, not finding and acting as a fuel pump attendant and taking time out within your trip. So you're saving 5-10 minutes per refueling trip throughout your year of ownership of an EV. Now, another question is, how fast do you really need to charge? If you're doing less than 100 kilometres a day, a power point will pretty much do the job. An overnight charge less than an hour, 8 hours, I should say, for that, and about $500 up if you're putting it nearby your switchboard or it's an easy run. I always say, please don't use just a common garden extension leads. They don't like it. If they get a bit hot, they basically go into a positive feedback loop, pretty much. Even that was one charging event for a BMW i3, and it went from a little bit hot to corked, and that was the result. And however, within range of one car charge for the day is putting that fixed wall charger stuff, and I'll put a table up next which sort of summarizes all these numbers. Get an overnight charge by Kona. If I ran it all the way down to zero, which I almost never do, I could get a 0 to 100% charge in about 9 hours. And there are about 1,500 up installed, depending on which one. The cheapest boxes for putting on the wall, about $700, $600. Some of the all singing, all dancing ones that I'll talk about a bit later, maybe 3,000-4,000, but they do all everything but make you coffee in the morning. They'll program charging, measure your house current, and adjust the charging accordingly, ramp it up and down according to how much solar you're putting out. The smart charging technology is quite fascinating. So this is my little table. The ones in red there are pretty much the 1.8 kilowatts or 12 kilometres charge per hour. I like to think in 2 kilometres charge per hour. That's your typical one that comes with the car. They detune it down from a 10 amp power point to about 8 amps. And you get about 12 kilometres. It gets you out of trouble. Or if you're doing very few kilometres, that's quite handy you could just use that. For a 2.4 kilowatt one, you can actually get 16 kilometres charged. If you're using a 15 amp power point, you'll get 24 kilometres charged. So that is really handy in your travels. If you're stopping at caravan parks and EVs are a marriage made in heaven. You can roll in with 20-30% charge at 5 o'clock in the evening, plug it in, and the next morning you've got 100% charge ready to go again. Now for home charging, well, most houses are single phase, so that's your 7.4 kilowatt charger, and almost 50 kilometres charge an hour. As I said, my Kona on that will recharge overnight fully. If you happen to have won the EV charging lottery and have a 3-phase house, then you can have 11 kilowatts 3-phase, which will give you 73 kilometres charged. Or if you really want to go the whole hog, you can do 22 kilowatts and nearly 150 kilometres charged. Now, for home use, those last two are not particularly necessary. On the other hand, on the road or get a charger at a shopping centre or supermarket, they'll mostly be 11 kilowatts, and you can pull up from a supermarket for an hour and get a 73 kilometre charge. On the right, I've put in the typical DC chargers that you'll see, a 50, 150 and a 350. And depending on how fast the car will charge, most new cars that you buy now are around 150. Some of them, the expensive ones like Porsches, can do 350 or 300 and 350. At the middle point of that charge, at a 50 kilowatt charger, you can get 20 minutes for 100 Ks. When it comes to the 350 ones, it's 2.6 minutes for 100 Ks. That, by the way, is 0 to 80% charge, and that's the sort of range for a DC charger, because the deal is with a DC charging, it slows down significantly after 80% or thereabouts. Therefore, the time taken from 80 to 100 is about the same as 0 to 80. So when you're on the road, you would leave home with your AC charging at 100%, and then you would stop at the DC chargers along Melbourne to Sydney, which I did last week, or Sydney back to Melbourne, in fact. I would just take it up to 80% or only as much as I needed to get to the last destination. Little QR code there for it is an article I wrote for The Driven with a whole lot more detail about that. I also have a sort of rule of thumb I'll talk about for the course that I've been part of designing for electricians to learn about EV charging. If you're doing more than 4 hours twice a week for charging, maybe look at the next step up just for convenience sake. But that's sort of a rule of thumb. You don't have to stick to that, but it's worthwhile thinking about. People always ask me, how far can I go on a charge? And the key thing is there are 3 main systems for estimating the range of a car. or an EV. NEDC is the old European standard. It was dumped there in 2016. Sadly, is still ours due to our non-development of a fuel efficiency standard or fuel quality standard, which may change very soon. To when we get the fuel efficiency standard, they say they will swap from NEDC to WLTP. So WLTP is the new European standard, and the US EPA is what is developed there. And the difference between WLTP and US EPA is Europeans drive more inner to middle sort of suburban areas and a little bit of highway driving, and the US system, they drive larger distances and higher speeds. They have a different test standard, so that was reflected in their numbers for the ranges, like fuel economy. Now, if you're driving at a higher speed and longer distances, you get different fuel economies than driving around town. For my Kona, for instance, so I have a Hyundai Kona electric, I would never get 557 k's in a pink fit. But I will get 480 to 500, even 510 around town. So WLTP is a really good number to use for around town. Whereas on the highway, I'll get about 420 kilometres. So US EPA numbers is also about right for that. So if you're looking at the numbers, check what standard's been used. If you do a lot of suburban and outer regional driving, then WLTP. If you're doing a lot of regional and highway driving, then use the US EPA number. The fact sheets that I'll refer you to a bit later, actually, I try to include all three numbers when available. So the next couple of bits of this slide are just for people for reference, so I'll skip the writing part, but that's just sort of putting in writing what I've just talked about. As I said, the NED standard is about 30% too high, so I tend to refer to NEDC as not even done, close, if people are trying to remember that one. More detail, Renew Edition 155. I've also popped that article on my website for those that can't access the Renew article. People often say, oh, but they're good around town, but you'll never get to Perth. Well, I did that in 2022, and that's me sitting on the eastern end of the Nullarbor Plain. And this is what you see. You can check a program called PlugShare, and these orange dots are the DC fast charger network. I actually did in 2019 a EV long weekend not ruined tour due to our previous Prime Minister saying that they would ruin the long weekend. And in 7 days, I did 2,400 Ks, no DC fast charging. That was one of my rules that I set, partly because there were none in Victoria, or there was about 3 or 4 that were not even close to my route. And it was easy to do just using caravan park outlets. I could comfortably do that sort of numbers. The car did it really well. I was exhausted of that. It was not your typical long weekend, but we now have dozens and dozens of them in Victoria, and all up the east coast, up as far as, I'm trying to remember, Cairns or beyond, and right up to Port Augusta now. There's still a bit of a gap between Port Augusta and just over the border in WA, but that is soon to be filled up, and the same sort of gap up through the centre of Australia. But you can see that those green dots, where I've got the whole map, those ones are your wall-mounted 11, perhaps 22 kilowatt chargers that you can do AC charging at least. Next, at the moment, when you're between DC fast chargers like Putra, which is about 2/3 of the way from Port Augusta to Ceduna, in my 7 kilowatt charging car, because my Kona has a 7 kilowatt AC charger built in. I need to sit there for 3 hours to get that extra top up. Putra would be a lovely spot to put a DC fast charger, but with luck, they'll be putting one in soon. But if I had an 11 kilowatt charger, that 3 hours would be reduced to 2 hours. And if I had a 22 kilowatt AC charger built into the car, I would now have to sit there for 1. So it would be much more convenient. So my next car will have a 22 kilowatt AC charger built into it. For most people, the 11 that was being built into almost all the cars now is more than enough, because they will do 7 on a home system. For the future, well, charging is very much done at home. 80-90% is done at your place of residence. Next up is your AC charging this is a library in Sydney, or in Park Library, and that's the sort of thing that's been put in. That may very well be a 3-phase 22 for the 2 sections, and it will share the 22 as 11 each side if there were 2 cars parked. In France, they say any car park over 100 car spots must have a solar carport roof, which means during the day it will be excellent car charging available. There's the networks for the DC fast charge. That's in Keith on the way to Adelaide from Melbourne, and that's partly a closed network. Originally was a closed network, so only available to Teslas, but they're now opening up to all cars because they use the same plug. That plug war is over. So they use the same plug. And about 50% of all Tesla chargers is now open to any taker. They are relatively expensive per kilowatt hour, but if you need a charge, if only 5% or less of your charging is ever done with a DC charger, the extra $10 or $20 a year is probably not going to break the bank. There's the ChargeFox network and the EV network, and they're the up-and-coming new networks like BP and what have BP, in fact, do have one, BP Pulse, Ampol have AmpCharge. But ChargeFox is actually owned by the Automobile Association, so NRMA, RACV, etc., have bought ChargeFox recently. That's their network, and that's probably the biggest network at the moment, although EV is catching up quickly. And there's an EV charger. There's one in your region. EV are rolling them out very quickly. Finding your stations or planning your route. PlugShare is my go-to whenever I'm going anywhere. I'll just check PlugShare and see what chargers will be on my path. Then for newbies, if you're not sure if you've got a long uphill drive or a mountainous road, a better route planner is really good because it will take into account the car you've got, the start and end of your trip, the start and the amount of charge you have to begin with, how much charge you want at the end, and it will just plan the route for you, tell you exactly where to stop, and it's really good. The first few months, if you're doing sort of long trips, it's a good way to use it, but you'll rapidly get used to it, and then you just go straight from PlugShare through to the provider apps. At the moment, it is actually rather frustrating having these multiple apps. It's ChargeFox, EV, AmpCharge, BP, Pulse, and a couple of others. A key point is we're behind the curve in adoption. In England, for instance, they have brought out a law recently that says not only do basically all apps have to be interoperable, so if you have the ChargeFox apps, you are able to connect to EV, AmpCharge, or whatever, and they all the DC fast chargers must have credit card facilities, which is starting to happen here, but they just mandate that they must have it so you don't have to pay through the apps. So that's what's coming, but at the moment it is slightly frustrating. But given you don't do a lot of DC fast charging, or if you did, you'd be using a particular one and be getting used to it. It's not that bad, but it will get better. Promoting EV uptake in terms of the governments, well, they have basically options of carrots, sticks, and policy. And there's a whole lot about to come out of fuel efficiency standards. So I thought I'd throw these slides in to give you a bit of background. First up, there's a big stick coming around the world, and that's when countries ban the sale of internal combustion engine cars. So Norway, for instance, as I kept alluding to, is 2025, and it's pretty much game over there. 93% of new car sales there are plug-in electric vehicles, of which 86 are the full battery and 6 plug-in hybrid. So even the plug-in hybrid is on its way out. As you can see, the number of numbers, and EU have recently said 2035, and as usual with their system, they're haggling a bit, but it has been pretty much settled as that date. As a result, the manufacturers have seen the writing on the wall, and a number of them have said, okay, we're just going to stop building internal combustion engine cars because there's no point in competing for a smaller and smaller market when there's this other growing bigger one that we could start serving and get into early. Jaguar said they won't build an internal combustion engine car after 2025. Volvo said in Europe they'll only be building electric cars and selling them by 2030, and have basically said, well, they have said they'll only be selling battery electric vehicles here in Australia by 2026, so they'll be the first to go. Renault have said that they will be BEV only by 2030. Not here. I was interested to hear the CEO of Renault Australia last week at a press launch for the Megane E-Tech was saying they expect to be selling petrol cars for significantly longer. So they didn't read the memo from head office that they may not be building them anymore. As you can see, there's a few people, even GM and some of the American companies are starting to set dates for the end of internal combustion engine production. Our Australian policy, well, we've got emission reductions targets, sort of motherhood statements of 43% by 2030 and 0 by 2050. A national EV strategy came out about 10 months ago, also fairly motherhood sort of statements. And there's been a whole lot of carrots offered in terms of incentives coming now. Import duty, they're dropping that for places we don't have a free trade agreement with already. By the way, that import duty is only 5%, so it's not a huge number, but it's better. If fringe benefits tax has been removed from EV, so you can buy with pre-tax dollars an EV and can run it entirely personal use, and it's exempt from fringe benefits tax. Electric car discounts, various states and territories run them, although they're going away now as EVs are coming down in price and becoming more available, so the days of the car discounts are starting to become numbered. There's still registration discounts in the states and territory-based ones. We have some green upgrade subsidies that may be worth actually. Some of them actually include putting in EV charging. So Manuel Council here in Melbourne will do up to 1,500 to 60% of a green upgrade, and it includes car chargers. And the sticks, well, we will finally get quality fuel by December 1, 2025. That came out over Christmas. So we use Euro 6D standards. So we're going to bring in the more fuel efficient cars that are sold in Europe. But we get the same models, but not the same motors that are about 20% less efficient. So we will be able to start importing those. We'll have a fuel efficiency standard on its way, which will actually set greenhouse gas emissions. So the fuel quality will be involving better quality fuels and setting emissions, as in pollution standards, and the fuel efficiency standard will be presenting a greenhouse gas standard. If you want to follow information about that, there's an article at The Driven I've written recently. And key point, though, is the government has a website which will close on the 4th of March. You can basically vote for which of the three options, as described in that article, or in somewhat more detail on the government website. You can vote for one of three options there. So if you're looking at what's coming in the next 12 months, these are the sort of cars. And there's a number of them that I've sort of noted as having just arrived. A Fiat 500e, drove that late last year as a test car, and the Fiat 500e Abarth, so the sporty version, has just arrived. There was actually one of those at the Everything Electric show in Sydney a week or so ago. You got the BYDs that are all around 40 grand, GWM Aura from around 40, and the MG4 starting from about low 40s as well, and also the MG ZS around there. We'll be seeing a few more. The Renault Megane E-Tech was officially launched last week from around 70, or it is around 70,500. There's only one specification. The only choice you get is paint color. Subaru BZ4X, which is the same as the Subaru Solterra, with the Solterra is a sort of a higher riding version. They are supposed to be arriving in the first half of this year, although they keep delaying. Same with the Nissan Ariya, which I think I even deleted off this slide because I gave up on it. Ford Mustang has just arrived. Actually test drove one of those and written a test report if you're interested on The Driven. Jeep Avenger. Jeep are actually starting to get heavily into electric vehicles and be bringing out a number this year. I think 3 of which will be arriving in Australia. But the Jeep Avenger, which is a small, medium-sized one, will be arriving in the second half of this year. The Volvo EX30 is quite a cheap Volvo, under 60 grand or thereabouts, and it will be available within a few weeks to a month or so. The VW ID4 and ID7 are arriving later this year. Hyundai Kona, the all new model, has just arrived, and is slightly cheaper than the previous model. I've even seen, also at Everything Electric last week, the Lotus Electra. That year has one arrived and is supposedly arriving in the second quarter of this year. On top of that, with the passenger vehicles, we've got our light commercial vehicles, and there's bucket loads. We have about 14 of them available in Australia now. There'll be 16 more by the end of this year. LDV eDeliver 7 was just launched a week and a half ago, and it starts off at just under 60 grand for an ABN holder. So get my tongue back into gear. That's before GST or on-road costs, but for a business, it's not getting exempted to the GST side of it. A 60 grand price is starting to look very economic for total cost of ownership. A number of others have arrived or are about to arrive. Ford E-Transit arrived middle of last year, a little bit on the expensive side. Certainly a lot more than eDeliver 7. The Ford E-Transit Custom, which will be a competitor to the eDeliver 7, will be arriving soon. And I'm guessing Ford has sort of gone, oh dear, when the eDeliver 7 price came out. So they might be sharpening their pencils as we speak. Peugeot e-Partner has just arrived. Renault Kangoo E-Tech will be arriving in March. And for those people looking for the Rivian, they did say that they would be coming as first came off the rank after America. There's, in the usual production hell of a new EV manufacturer, they're like Tesla in that way, and they're now heading for Europe and probably going to bring out a R2 version, which is slightly smaller, that we may see here rather than the R1. When can you afford one is certainly a big question that a lot of people ask. The magic number is $100 US per kilowatt hour, that red line there, and we're getting closer and closer. I think we're now down under $120 per kilowatt hour for the magic number. So you can do a bit of maths of, average 60 kilowatt hour battery times the extra $20. That's how close they're getting to match parity with their internal combustion engine cousins. And you can see back in 2010 when the Mitsubishi Leaf and i-MiEV were around, they were $1,220. So it's an order of magnitude that they've come down in the last 10, 12 years. So they're certainly getting closer and closer in price. Manufacturers are rather keen to keep the price up, so they make more money out of them that way, the bigger, more luxurious SUVs, although there's going to be some serious competition from the Chinese manufacturers, and a few more look like they might be announced this year. Now, for benefits to the environment, there's a bit of a lay down there. The environment, well, there's no tailpipe pollution inside of the CBDs and towns and cities. Overall emissions are definitely well down. In Tasmania, where it's mostly hydro, looking at this is for 10,000 kilometres travelled a year, comparing it to a current Corolla. A current Corolla is around 1.5 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. It's 0.23 of a tonne, so 1/6 of the amount of equivalent emissions for a EV driven in Tasmania, run on the Tasmanian electric grid. And that's just running off the grid, not off your own solar. Negligible emissions, as I said, for running off your own solar. And no coolants, no oil, plugs, filter, all that stuff. Brake pads are much reduced because they last a lot longer, because a lot of the braking is done by regenerative braking, not by pushing your foot on the brakes and wearing out the brakes and discs. As far as you're concerned, reduce service costs, although check what the service costs are when you're buying one. Some of manufacturers are starting to sort of load up the service costs to try and claw back some of the money that they're going to lose from the service. Others, like Mycona, have just said $165 for 10 years, fixed price. I think that just went up to $180 for the first 10 years. I'm not going to argue, $180, it's a pretty good deal for just check the car, check the tyres, rotate them, do a service update, do a recall updates, I should say, update the maps. It works pretty well for me. It's just nice to have that second pair of eyes running over it for a safety check every year. Electricity, by the way, is a lot cheaper, as I'll explain in the next set of slides. And that's what I'm going to lead to now. Picking some numbers, unfortunately, these are from the Green Vehicle Guide, so they are NEDC. But if you use NEDC for a petrol and a electric, it's a fair comparison, although they're probably a little bit off in actual real world use. But it gives you a bit of an idea. So Zoe would use roughly $266 worth of electricity. An internal combustion engine Corolla would use $1,200 based on that fuel litre economy. So you're going to save a bit over $900 just in fuel. So your service estimates, you might save a couple $100 a year, because especially over 4 or 8 years of ownership, you don't have timing belts, you don't have brake discs and brake pad replacements, you don't have all those oil for all those sort of major services just disappear. There is no major service on a Kona, for instance. So total savings, for every 10,000 Ks, you're going to save over $1,000 per 10,000 kilometres. Just as very rough numbers to give you an idea. Key question is, when's a good time to charge an EV? And that's certainly changing. That's the grid demand in California over the last 10 years, roughly. You can see back in 2012, it was the usual sort of low at night, a bit high during the day, a bit of a peak in the evening when people go home, and then tapering off to the overnight charge again. Then as the years went by, more and more solar and wind, especially solar, were coming in, and the grid demand was getting less because it was all getting provided by the solar, and the main generators that are providing these lines are suddenly providing almost too much power. This is what's called the duck curve, and that's, if you hear about the duck curve and the problem that the duck curve causes, EVs are a perfect solution to the duck curve, because if you plug in during the day, you will soak up all that excess power being generated by the solar panels, and the generators don't have to get tuned down. And generators, particularly coal-fired generators, particularly dislike being sped up and down, and they wear out faster that way. They like a nice steady base load. So the supply authorities are starting to do this. In WA, this is an example, their super off-peak rate to soak up electricity from solar panels, 8.2 cents per kilowatt hour. Yet on the other side of the coin, the 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. peak in summer, it's 51.2. So unless you really, really had to, you would not be plugging in during the day or during the evening. And then your off-peak numbers at 11 p.m. 6 a.m. that we're used to, about 18.5 cents. But just that's what's going to happen. Start sending price signals to get people to charge at the right times. Because electricians are fairly conservative people, and they end up often saying, looking at the switchboard, looking at 32 amp, 7 kilowatt charger and go, you need a new switchboard, you need a new power line coming in and just upgrade. I was part of a group setting up this course, which is now an accredited course, 22609 VIC, so any TAFE can pick it up and run with it. And it's basically teaching electricians that you don't need to upgrade to power supply in almost all situations. You're just choosing the right charging option for the car and the customer. So it's designing the vehicle charging system is one unit, and the other one is testing and commissioning it, or fault finding them if they break down. And that's what the course is about. So if you're looking for car charging being put in and your electrician says, you've got to upgrade a switchboard, sometimes you do need to put a switchboard with old fuses or that type of switchboard, but that's not the car's fault. You're just overdue for it. But in general, if you've got fuses and a fair bit of space, you don't need a new switchboard or an upgrade. You just need to put in the right charging solution. And this is what we teach the electricians, and it's probably good for you to know in terms of understanding it, to check that the electrician is fully understanding what it's about. First up is sort of your dumb charger. And I'll put up a QR code at the moment. There's a link with a whole lot more detail if you're not quite following what I'm saying on this slide. It's basically you plug in that 3-pin plug type 1, or just an ordinary, really old, dumb charger that just, you plug it into the car starts charging at its full rate, and that's it. You are the one that manages it for the cheap power rates and that type of thing, or wanting to soak up your solar. You make sure that you tell the car to charge a bit more slowly, and then it'll charge more slowly. You can do that to use your solar, for instance. That's a dumb charging system, and you're totally in control of that. So very much customer understanding, education is really important on that side. If you've got a smart-ish charger, this is all the stuff that's behind the meter, so you can do all sorts of fun things behind the meter. You put a clamp meter around the incoming supply, and you can measure how much power you're using. So you have an all-electric house, and you have, say, a constrained power supply of maybe 44 amp 40 amp switch fuse, for instance, on the front of the house, then you could charge at 32 amps so long as somebody doesn't turn the induction cooktop or a fan heater on. If they did, the charger is smart enough to go, you're drawing a bit too much power, or ramp the car charging down for a while, and then put it back up again as soon as the induction cooktop or the heater or whatever is turned off again. Same for solar. You can actually have a clamp around the solar, and it will measure the solar and say, you can tell the charger, I only want to charge off solar, I want 50% solar, and it is fully programmable. And you can also program it for tariff times as well. But you have to program the tariff times. The grid doesn't tell it that. And that's where the third layer comes in. It's a smart charger. Pretty much the same thing as the smart-ish charger, but the grid can talk to it. So long as you have the right programming language, so a fairly modern car charger, they will be able to upgrade to a smart charger as soon as the grid basically gets its voice. So you need to understand how it works. But other than that, you can pretty much set it and forget it. As I said, there's a QR code for an article with significantly more detail about that than I can cover in about the minute or so I spent here. For future-proofing your installation, this is what we teach the electricians. Smart chargers may be mandated in the future. In England, they certainly are. Vehicle to putting out to home or grid will soon be available. So to be prepared for these, put the right size cable. If it's a 3-phase house, maybe a 22 kilowatt capable lead, a wire. For a single phase house, 7 kilowatt, so 32 amp cable is put in. That's 16 square millimeter cable, or a 6 or 10 millimeter squared, and run data cables in. So you can do those clamps. Some of them are wireless, some of them are cable. So if you've got the opportunity, something's being done or a new house built, just throw the data cables in. It doesn't matter if they don't get used later. Data cable's cheap. And if you're throwing it in with the other cable, you might be spending an extra $50 all up. Put it in a charger with the later languages, OCP, Open Charge Point Protocol 1.6 or above. Most of them coming out with 2.0 now, I believe. So you'll be fairly safe there. Some of the old dumber chargers don't use that. So they'll stay pretty much a dumb charger or a semi-smart one, and they'll never wise up because they'll do the sensing of the solar or whatever, but they will never be able to talk to the grid. CCS2 vehicle to home and grid chargers are not currently available. As I've said earlier, they will become so later in the year or early next year. Vehicle to home will be available around that time, and then late next year, probably vehicle to grid stuff once the grid works out how to talk to a car charger. A few more transition practicalities. If you have an old switchboard, you may need to do it up. So have to assess that sort of stuff. There's an article in Renew for that. If you have somewhere to charge off the street, there's options available for car where you don't have charging on off the street charging. There's a number of options that are available, discussed in that magazine edition. Electricity tariffs, as you can see, can be quite expensive or cheap. You just got to be aware of them, so keep an eye out. There's also an article there. As I said, the smart or dumb ones, there was some articles as well as the Driven, which is probably the most recent. Your BYO lead, I said they're about $220-ish. That just plugs into your car and into the BYO lead charger. Or if you're going off the beaten DC fast charger track, one of those is quite useful, but maybe 1 in 100 people may need that. The rest, you don't need to spend that $1,200, $1,300. And I'll pop those articles on my website as well if you can't get them from Renew. For your local EV charging information, the Macedon Rangers actually has a web page and shows some of the charging sites there. And I'm quite sure if you contact them and start talking and find out more about it, there should be a whole lot more information through that website. I've actually listed it there. Again, I'll be putting my email details at the end of this presentation. For more information, you can go to the AEVA EV fact sheets. I am actually the person behind them in writing. There's a summary page of all the EVs on the market currently, and that will include your range, whether it has vehicle to load or not. I think I've actually updated that to vehicle to load or home. Your size, class, battery size, AC and DC charging rates, and tow ratings. And the price listing there is on the road pricing in Victoria. So I do not put in the pricing for plus AUX that a lot of manufacturers do. It doesn't vary a lot between states, but certainly for us in Victoria, they are the roughly right numbers for an on-the-road cost in Victoria. There is also, for every one of those models that is out and available, by the way, that summary page, there's also one for what's coming in the next 6 to 12 months that are confirmed, and there's a third one for the light commercial vehicles, both here and coming soon. But for each one of the vehicles that are here now, both light commercial and passenger vehicles, there's a double-page fact sheet using the same template, same headings all the way through. So you can do a direct comparison, be it battery size, charging speeds, all of those are on the same headings in the same spot on each page. So you can get an idea and do a direct comparison. As each model moves to second-hand, I convert that to a second-hand template and list a few things that are worth looking for in a second-hand version of that vehicle. If you want to go and download some of those fact sheets, that's a QR code, or just type in aeva.au/fact sheets. I'll let people grab that QR code if they wish. Give it a couple of seconds. Anyway, I've only got 5 minutes to go, so I better keep moving. Not much left to go. To find out more, Renew is a really good source of not just EV information, but all alternative energy sources and low impact housing and living. They also have a magazine called Sanctuary for specifically devoted to architecture and low impact architecture. There's, in addition to 158, was how to check out a second-hand EV. Oh, pardon me. And in the last edition I talked about electric ute and van options that are coming. That's 16 additional ones on top of the 14 we currently have. The Australian Electric Vehicle Association is also a good source of information, in particular the discussion forum, which is free to join. The forum's there, and it's a really good source of information if you pop questions up. A few websites. Obviously, I write for The Driven, so I tend to plug that one. There are a number of others from overseas sites, such as Clean Technica and Green Car Reports and a few others. There's lots of them overseas, but the Driven is the main Australian one. The EV Council, they proudly put on the front of their webpage representing the electric vehicle industry. AEVA, Australian Electric Vehicle Association, basically represent the consumer, sort of the consumer, I should say. And it's sort of the choice version of publications, whereas the Electric Vehicle Council, they represent the big end of town. So they do some really good stuff, don't get me wrong, but they do tend to flavour it with what their particular paying members want you to hear. But 99% of their, or 90% of their stuff is unbiased, shall we say. And of course, there's my website as well, which I list some of those articles and things. We're down to any burning questions. I'll let Justin come back in and he can field some questions and ask what's happening, and I shall see if I can remember how to stop sharing. Oh, that's how to do it. Click stop share. Easy done.
Wonderful. Thanks, Bryce. That was really great. It was really great. I've scribbled down lots of little notes. There's just always so much to talk about with this topic, isn't there? So many different little things to think about, and so many different things to consider when we're sort of transitioning over. I wanted to quickly ask around. So out here in the Macedon Ranges, our towns are quite spread out, and we also have a large sort of part of our community that will be still traveling into the city for work as well. So I was wondering if we could just unpack some of those influencing factors around distance or range on the vehicles. I know there's quite a few kind of different influences that mean that maybe what is highlighted in a car's range doesn't quite always match up to reality. So yeah, I wonder if we could unpack that for a sec.
That's a really good question. If you're driving from Macedon in the countryside and Ballarat, Melbourne, those sorts of places, Bendigo, probably use the US EPA number. So on those fact sheets, if this car is sold in America, I will list what its US EPA number is. Some of them aren't, so no, I can't find them. If you can't find a US EPA number, take about 10% off the WLTP number. So that will give you a good idea. If you're using the air conditioner or heater a lot, you'll lose about another 10% in range.
We had a colleague once that mentioned even high winds could have influenced the range that she was getting. Is that correct? Or
but it's the same for a petrol car. If you're driving into a heavy headwind, you're going to use more fuel than if you've got a really good tailwind.
Yeah, brilliant. Also, I guess I wanted to quickly touch on sort of the plug-in hybrids and the choices between going for a plug-in hybrid as opposed to just going for a battery EV.
Yeah, plug-in hybrids. Is there much point going down that path? Or should we just be looking straight at battery EVs?
I tend to say look at the battery EV rather than plug-in hybrid. Overseas, the experience is that they are dropping off in number in sales because they're an interim technology designed to fill in the gap when battery prices were very expensive. Now you can buy battery electric vehicles, 450, 500, 550, even 600 kilometre ranges. There is little reason for the plug-in hybrids anymore, unless you've got a particular reason. For buying something where you're driving a lot in areas where there's no DC fast charging. But I would probably, in that case, hang off if you can keep your petrol car going until the battery vehicles and the DC fast chargers become available to suit your needs and your trips. There's no need to rush out and buy an EV tomorrow if you've got a perfectly good internal combustion engine car. Just keep it going until it's time to change. And when it's time to change, consider an EV and does it meet your needs?
Yeah, brilliant. Kimberly Cooks put a question into the Q&A, and please anyone feel free to use that Q&A to throw any questions out there. They've asked, what's the lifespan of an EV car battery?
That's a really good question. The stats on the Teslas in particular, they use a fairly common battery technology and they've been around the longest, so they're the ones you're going to get most of the data from it because there's the biggest number of those of any one particular model. They're finding between 0.5 and 1% range lost or capacity lost per year. So if you buy now a car with 500 kilometre range, in 10 years' time, you've lost between 25 and 50 kilometres, which Melbourne to Sydney is probably an extra 10 minutes charging, maybe less, probably. If it was 2.6 minutes for a 100 kilometre charge, then it's only a couple of minutes, and 5 minutes at most on a charger. And around town, you're not going to notice it. The batteries themselves, their warranty currently is around 8 years and 70% remaining capacity. So that's a worst case scenario. If it goes below that, you just get a new one for free. In California, they're now bringing in legislation to say it must be 10 years and 70% starting from, I think it's next year or the start of 2026. and by 2030 it must be 80%. And they're deliberately doing that in order to make sure or put confidence in the second-hand car market. But certainly the longevity of the batteries is such that you should be confident they will last. And California and those laws, Europe, for instance, is looking at introducing the same laws. So that will flow through to here, because if people are worried about battery life, a manufacturer saying, oh, we'll offer you 10 years and 80% battery, it's just going to be a hell of a marketing edge. So it won't take them long to, as soon as they're offering that in Europe, in America, they're going to go, we can offer that with no skin off our nose.
I did scribble down a question around the with the batteries at the end of their life. Are they recyclable, or is there systems in place at the moment to what's happening with the batteries at the end, I guess?
So there's two answers to that. One is they don't necessarily go to recycling after they end their life in a car. So if probably the car will be scrapped and then they come out of the car, they can go into a standing storage system. So Renault actually in Europe have got some containerized systems set up to about 10 megawatt hours, I think, worth of batteries, where they've got old, they've been building EVs for about 2013, so that would be 11 years now. So some of their older batteries are going into these containerized storage systems, and they will provide up to 10 megawatt hours of battery backup. And they've also built new batteries for their older models and just put them in that. Those get gently cycled and carefully looked after. So when they do a warranty replacement, they may have stopped making them. But it's a simple matter of just pull it out with a forklift and send it off to the dealer to be fitted. That's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is they'll live in that storage system for maybe another 8 to 10 years. So they're getting towards maybe 20, 25 years old. And then they can be pretty much fully recycled. So they're looking at 90%. And in Europe, they're actually, I think it's 93 or 4% now. And Europe's actually bringing in laws that they must be recyclable and easily recyclable. So that's a new thing that's coming in the next. I was at a presentation from some Melbourne Uni people on this particular aspect that's coming up.
Yeah, good one. I guess that's always quite an important question around, all right, we've got these really great innovations, but also building in that circular economy to the design factor early on, I think is really important as well.
I might throw in one other point is the carbon debt people talk about for the battery.
Oh, yes, please.
In American driving, it's about 9 months to pay back that carbon debt, just running the battery plant off a normal grid. And about, I think it's about 18 months for Europe. But the other side of the coin is people like Volvo, VW, and several others, I can't think of off the top of my head, are actually starting to take fully green. VW is the other one at the moment, and they're basically getting full green energy into their factories, which means it'll come out of the factory with no carbon debt. You don't even have to repay that. So A, the battery doesn't have a particularly long time for repaying it, and B, they are starting to come out. Polestar's the other one. They're specifically making sure that it's full green energy production, so there's no carbon debt to replace once it rolls off the factory floor.
Brilliant. I have scribbled down here as well around buying a used EV. I know there's a couple of secondhand EV markets online. What are some things that I should be considering if I'm looking into a second-hand EV?
Well, almost all EVs, apart from the Renault Zoe, came with one of those portable chargers. So make sure it's in the boot and make sure it's working. Yep. I think I referred to a couple of articles on second-hand EVs, that was in Renew. To summarise it, get the owner to charge it up to 100% before you come to drive it, and then take it for a drive. And get a reasonable distance and check its range estimate when it's fully charged and see if it's close to whatever range estimate it was supposed to have originally. Then there you go, car sales, secondhand on EVs on car sales. You can actually filter for secondhand vehicles there too. But the main thing is get it fully charged, see what sort of range estimate. If it comes in like an old Leaf and it comes in at half the old battery range, a number of them will actually do. You can get a aftermarket app, which you can load onto your phone and put an onboard diagnostic port dongle. So it's basically a little plug that goes onto your OBD2 port in the car. You plug it in and you can get all this data off it, just Bluetooth it to your phone. So there are a number of those available. In fact, I'm about to write an article for Renew on the latest one, not right, Renew, The Driven on that particular aspect. The second-hand article, it's in Renew, actually does list a few of those, but there's more now. That's another one. But the other key point is an electric car is still 2/3 an ordinary car. So an ordinary mechanic can check the tyres, the brakes, the suspension, the bodywork. You check your bodywork for rough panel damage or poor repairs, all that sort of normal stuff you do within a car, you still do for a petrol car or for an electric car.
Yeah, great. I did also want to ask around towing. Again, a lot of our community have caravans or trailers that they will use quite regularly. What are some? How does our EVs respond currently to a trailer or some towing? Obviously, I know that the range would drop, but are there other sorts of things that might be happening as soon as you throw a trailer on the back? Or
well, the beauty of towing with an EV is it has maximum torque at very low revs, so it actually had a better pulling power than even a diesel. The other side of the coin is they do chew electrons when towing. But so do petrol car. If you're towing a big caravan with a petrol car, you're going to lose, or diesel, you're going to lose 30% or more. An electric car, the Rivian, which has 2.5 ton or 3 ton, I can't remember, it's a fairly high tow rating. They say if you load it up fully, it might even be 4 ton. Off the top of my head, I'm not quite sure. I know it's being a big ute, it actually has quite a high tow rating. They say if you load it up fully with its towing a trailer with its full rated load, you lose about 50%. But I've towed with my Kona before they quashed it and said you can't do that anymore. And that was a small, lightweight luggage trailer, very aerodynamic. I would lose about 10-15% driving on the 100 Ks on the highway. If I put a whole lot of stuff on the roof, I lost about 30%. So it's windage, not technically load, that knocks your fuel economy around.
Yeah, great. Again, I'm jumping all over here with questions.
Go for it.
You were talking around the smart-ish chargers and the smart chargers at home, and that kind of blew my mind a little bit. I wasn't able to really take in that sort of detail, but I was wondering what kind of questions might I be asking an electrician in the sort of layman terms, if that's what I'm after, sort of that smart issue, or even if I'm down even further and want a smart charger, what sort of questions am I asking? What conversations?
Well, part of it is if the electrician's clued up about car charging, he should be able to ask you the right question. So basically look for him to be asked, or him or her, to be asking the right questions. How far do you drive your car? What size your car battery is? How much? When do you have solar? So if you're asking all of those questions, Doug's throwing up the article on when should I charge a charger versus a home power point. So there's a number of articles on The Driven about that, sort of for full details. But check that your electrician knows a fair bit about it. It's probably the first point, and then they should be asking the right questions of you. It's pretty much a matter of, if you only do a few Ks, a power point or even a 15 amp power point might be all you need. If you have solar, a power constrained house, then you will need some sort of smartish charger. And if you really want to go to hold with vehicle to grid and stuff, then hold off buying both the car and the charger until those become available.
And then I also was thinking, as an EV driver yourself, have you come across any unexpected challenges or barriers when you, obviously you've been in the game for a long time, so you're probably very quizzed up on it all, but was there anything that really caught you by surprise?
It's still not as easy to drive interstate as it is in a petrol car, because the petrol stations are everywhere. So you need to plan. And I occasionally get a little bit complacent, like I did on my way up to Sydney 2 weeks ago. I just didn't plan ahead. So I stopped at Euro, which I don't normally do. I would normally stop at Bar North and North. I just thought I'll have a look, and I just charged it up and thought it's a bit slow here, and I'll just get going anyway. I wasn't fully up to 80%. I thought I'll be fine. And then sort of as I kept going, thinking, my next stop will be Gundagai, and then realised I'd forgotten to put enough charge in. And there really wasn't a good charging option. Or at least there was a good charging option, but I just had to detour by Tarkata for a minute. Then, because I didn't do my homework and double check that the Gundagai chargers were doing the right thing, when I got there, they were throttled back a bit and went, I should have just stayed as Tarkata and fully charged it. So do your homework and check that the chargers are doing what they should. They do break down, and it's still teething problems in the UK. To use that example again, they're setting legislative requirements for uptime, so they're allowed to get fined if they break down. So here in Australia, they're still a bit slack about fixing them. So, and especially when it comes to a single charger site, be very wary of putting that on your itinerary. If a single charger goes down, you're in strife. More and more sites being built now come with more than one charger for that reason. In Europe, they're finding if there's only a small number, 1 or 2 chargers at a site, people don't use them because they're just too afraid of it not working or being used by other people. They're generally putting in sort of 6 charger sites now, just for people's confidence. So it's early days. It's sort of fun stopping and chatting to people at the EV chargers anyway. A couple of times on the way back from Sydney, I just stopped for about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just waiting for a charger to be empty at the Gundagai one, purely because it was one of them was not working and the other 2 have been throttled back a bit. But that's the only time. The frustrating part was there's 6 Tesla chargers directly behind those ChargeBox chargers, but they're not open to the general public yet. So, and they weren't being used. It was really frustrating going, I could just pop down there, high power charger. There'd be no queue, but it was just teething problems. Early days, it's just the charger rollout is basically being held up by the power companies being very slow in approving the connections or getting the power supplies to them. They just don't seem to have woken up that there's this whole new field. They need to be a bit more switched on. Pardon the pun, switched on.
No, definitely. I think I totally agree. I guess one last question as well. Just back to the fuel standards coming in. What will that mean for us as purchasers of EVs or low emissions vehicles? What will that offer us?
For internal combustion engine cars, we'll get more efficient vehicles because we'll have better quality fuel, so we can bring in Europe, they've had these sort of standards for quite a long time. There's Euro 6D and their fuel efficiency standards, pollution standards, greenhouse gas standards. They are building, for the same model that are sold here, they sell them with much more efficient engines. But we had very poor quality fuel, so if you put those engines here, the sulfur would destroy the catalytic converter because we have about 30 times more sulfur than we should. And we had multiple times more aromatics, benzene and stuff in our fuel as well. So that gummed up the cylinders of these really efficient cars. So they just don't bring them here. They bring them with the older motors in them, which are about 20% or more less efficient. So we'll be getting more fuel efficient petrol diesel cars, and we'll be getting more EVs because they'll be setting a price, sort of a reward for selling EVs and a penalty for selling internal combustion engine cars based on the CO2 emissions added up at the end of the year. So if their average sales were under a certain amount, that's good. And if they're significantly under that, they can actually sell the credits from their extra EVs to someone else. In Europe, I think it's about 20,000 euros bonus for selling an EV and about a 4,000 euro penalty for selling an internal combustion engine car if you don't balance it out to that CO2 level. So people like Tesla or some of the other manufacturers that are becoming more EV focused can make considerable money over in Europe selling those credits. So that's what will happen here. There'll be more encouragement to bring EV models here because if they can get those credits for selling the EVs in Europe or even America, why would you bother bringing them to Australia? And that's what's happened. Same for fuel efficient vehicles. They've got these older technologies, these older manufacturing lines. We'll just keep building them and sending them to Australia and those other countries that don't enforce quality fuel or efficiency standards.
And would it mean anything for, I guess, the conversion market? What's happening with the conversion market from internal combustion cars to EVs?
It's into a classics conversion market. There is no market for converting the day-to-day car. It would cost $60,000 upwards to $100,000 to convert a car properly. And you can buy EVs now for starting at around 40,000. So why would you get a car converted? But if you've got a classic, it's like hot rods, people will spend money on that. You can keep your classic going. If you've got an old English car which drops oil everywhere, it's probably a good thing to change it to electric. And there's actually some very good conversions being done in England, the kits. And there's a company here, Felton, that's basically what you got. Yep, Doug says put the Felton website up now, doing some really good stuff with classic Land Rovers, Minis, things like that, and do beautiful. It's not cheap, but then classic cars generally have relatively deep pockets to spend money on them. They're sort of preserving them for the future rather than a custodian rather than the owner, if you put it that way. It's nice to look after them.
Yeah, we've got a pretty prominent fella down here that's trying to convert his lovely early 60s Land Cruiser to an EV, and I don't think he's quite achieved it yet. I think he's still just he's still talking it out with lots of people around. So yeah, but it is a nice sentiment as a custodian to one of those beautiful cars, isn't it?
And don't get me wrong, it is fun to do your own conversion. Yeah. If you're going to do that, talk to AEVA. There's lots of people who've done them. I've done them myself. I don't do them anymore. But there are plenty of people, Doug knows multiple people that do conversions. The Geelong EV group that he's part of is pretty much focused on doing conversions and supporting each other in the conversions. And there's some beautiful jobs that have come out of that group.
Yeah. Yeah, lovely. Well, if there's no further questions, we might wrap it up there. There was just a question around, we at council have some EV chargers at the back of our offices, which would be really wonderful if they were open to the public, which we tried to do, but there was some funding agreements where they had to be private. But that's helping us to convert our fleet to an entire EV fleet by 2030. So that's underway, and those charges are sort of helping us do that as well. We've got a bit of a priority project throughout our council to get EV charging in every single township in the Shire. We've got 5, and I think we've got 4 to go at the moment. So we're getting there in terms of getting our charging infrastructure throughout the Shire as well. But yeah, if there's no further questions, I guess I'd just like to say thanks again, Bryce. It was really great. Just like so many questions, so much great information. So yeah, really thank you for sharing it with us tonight.
You're welcome, Justin. And hopefully I've answered a fair few of the questions and queries that your local people are interested in finding out about.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. We are going to finish up just a touch early. Time to go make a cup of tea, I think. So thanks for joining us, everyone. We will have one more webinar in this home sustainability series on March the 5th. And that will be all around designing and retrofitting your home for resilience. So we know that climate change brings with it more extreme weather and unpredictable weather. And so we wanted to share some information around what we can do to our homes to make them more resilient to those changes. So hopefully we can see you all there on March the 5th as well. So thanks for joining us. Like I said, we will have these on our website as well. So you can always revisit and stick around for a quick survey as well. But thanks again.